welcome to our IoDSA Social and Ethics Committee Forum event. I welcome you all. I'm just going to be saying hello and welcome from the IoDSA. We're very glad that you're joining us for our Social and Ethics Committee Forum Trend Survey, the report following on from the survey, where we can share insightful findings from this report. We have a great panel, as you can see ahead of us, in front of you, with great experience. Deon, Professor Deon Rossouw from the Ethics Institute will be introducing all our speakers. I will be handing over to Deon in a second. Deon is the chairman of the Social and Ethics Committee Forum. He is a member of the King Committee of Corporate Governance and is the CEO of the Ethics Institute. Deon is also a chartered director and the author of the Social and Ethics Committee Handbook. I am now going to request that my panel members switch off their cameras again, and Deon is going to keep his on, and we are going to start the presentation. Please enjoy, and don't forget, if you have some questions, pop them in the Q&A chat box. Chat in the chat box, ask questions in the Q&A box, and then we will take the questions that way. Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone, and Deon, over to you.
Thanks, Julie, and a very warm good morning from my side as well. Great to have you here. We are always delighted to see so many people interested in the work of the Social and Ethics Committee. When Social and Ethics Committees became mandatory in May 2012, I think there were high expectations of this committee, because just listening to the name of the committee, the Social and Ethics Committee, I think there was justifiably an expectation that this committee will contribute to building ethical organizations and ensuring rather that organizations are also responsible citizens. In other words, in terms of the impact on the economy, on the workplace, on the social environment, but also the natural environment in which they operate. And having closely monitored the development of social and ethics committees over almost a decade now, for the last 9 years, it is clear that in some cases, this potential of the Social and Ethics Committee really has been fulfilled, and that we see, at least in some of our leading companies, that the Social and Ethics Committee is changing the discourse in the boardroom, and that there's a lot of work being done in order to enhance both the ethical culture but also the corporate citizenship of our organizations. But like with anything in life, I suppose you always have leaders and you have laggards. And as I can sense that there is a sense of frustration on the part of government, but I think also by some of the partners at NetLag, that the committee isn't still fulfilling its full potential. And therefore, if we look at the recently published Companies Amendment Bill that was released beginning of October for public comment, that closed by the end of October, one can see that there really is a concerted effort by government to ensure that social and ethics committees take their job much more seriously. And most probably we will also discuss that a bit later. But back to the Social and Ethics Committee Trend Survey. The IOD, together with the Ethics Institute, established the Social and Ethics Committee Forum at the beginning of last year. And one of the first projects that this Social and Ethics Committee Forum of the IOD ventured into was to conduct an annual Social and Ethics Committee Trend Survey in order to understand better what are the dynamics, what are the challenges, and what are the achievements of social and ethics committees. So last year, also in November, we launched the first Social and Ethics Committee Trend Survey report, and that obviously served as a baseline. And now with the 2021 Social and Ethics Committee Trend Survey report, we can indeed start comparing our findings this year with our baseline findings of 2020. And we are so delighted that we once again had a very good response. We asked chairpersons of social and ethics committees to complete the survey on behalf of the entire committee and on behalf of their organization. And this year we had a 20% increase in our sample. Last year we had 75 organizations who completed the survey. This year it is up to in the 90s. So very delighted to see that there is also growing interest there. And I also would like to use this opportunity to thank those chairpersons of social and ethics committees who did take the trouble of completing the survey. Well, I would like to welcome all of you, and as Julie said at the beginning, I hope that you will use this opportunity to also engage with our panel. I will introduce the panel a bit later, but let's first start by seeing what the findings, the main findings were of the 2021 Social and Ethics Committee Trend Survey. And for that, we have invited my colleague, Dr. Paul Vorster. He's a senior researcher at the Ethics Institute, and he and his team was responsible for conducting the survey, for drafting the reports. So Paul, also thank you to you for the work that you and your colleagues have done there, and also for the IOD who partners with us on this whole project. So with that, Paul, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deon. And again, it's a great pleasure to present the findings of this survey, the second in a row. And for a survey researcher and for someone who looks to understand an area, I would use the metaphor here of candles in the dark. It's as if we have a very dark room. We don't quite understand the dimensions of the room and what is in the room. But with the first survey, we lit a very small candle, and we were able to see some of the room and understand some of the context. Now we have the opportunity of lighting another candle and seeing a little bit more of the room. And I hope that after we have done this survey a number of times, we will actually start seeing some trends. All right, we can move on from there. Julie, thank you so much. So let's dive into the characteristics of the sample. So as Deon indicated, we had slightly more social and ethics committees basically participate in this survey. And just to have a look at the breakdown, and you can see the 2020 results sort of in a light purple and in a royal dark purple, the 2021 results. And we noticed a slight decrease in the representation of very large organizations, about the same representation for mid-sized organizations. And lastly, you can see that our SMEs, the smaller and micro enterprises also increased a little bit, from last year. But basically, we have tapped into about the same size type of organization. In terms of the nature of the organization, again, we have listed companies as the most participants in this year's round, slightly down from last year. But you can see that the results overall are quite comparable. However, we had a very large increase in non-profit organizations in this round. And we also noticed something interesting, and that was that there was a number of younger social and ethics committees in this survey that came through. So not yet quite well established, and that came through in some of the data, but it is encouraging to see. All right, so colleagues, let's dive into the characteristics. So one of the questions that we asked the SECs or the subcommittee of the board responsible for ethics is, what would you like to, what do you call yourself? What is your name in your organization? And we can see that a slight decrease this year, but the most popular is still the Social and Ethics Committee, followed very closely by the Social Ethics and Transformation Committee. And colleagues, what you see in a name kind of resonates to the purpose of these institutions or these committees as well. So you start seeing that their name sometimes also overlaps with other functions or other elements. And it tells you to some extent what they do and what they're responsible for. You can see that a substantial increase in Social Ethics and Sustainability Committee, and then of course Social Ethics and Human Resources Committee. So that also tells you what shares the function to some extent. And then the Human Capital Committee. And we had no representation this year round of this interesting term called Responsible Business Committee, which we found in 2020. And then, of course, Audit and Finance Committee as well. So it's interesting that that particular committee name is responsible for the tasks of the SEC. Actually, we can move on to the next. Thank you. The primary reason for the establishment, we asked them, why did you develop or begin a social and ethics committee? And what's interesting is a slight correction from last year, where over 50% indicated that they did it for proactive reasons. In other words, with the main aim of building an ethical culture, dropped to 43% this year round, and a much higher representation this year round of SECs that were established because of compliance with the Companies Act. So we can see the power of the Companies Act really coming through here. And I think the truth is slightly better represented this year round than last year, but it does indicate that this legislation has an impact. And then you can see a slight decrease, but about the same with compliance with the King 4 report. And then reactive reasons, much lower percentage this year than last year, thank goodness, due to corporate scandals. So sometimes organizations may react by establishing an SEC as well, which is not really what we want. We want that proactive establishment. Julie, please move ahead. Thank you. So we also asked them whether they are a standalone committee. And what is fascinating, there was quite a large correction between 2020 and 2021. So in 2020, 84% said that they were a standalone committee. So they shared no functions with any other type of committee in the organization. Whereas in 2021, we're seeing that 69% said that they are a standalone committee, with 1 in 3, about 1 in 3, 31%, indicating that they do share a function. And are not a standalone committee. So very interesting to note. We also asked them whether they had approved terms of reference, and colleagues, you can see that the scores are very high for both years. So we can say that, you know, more than 90% of the SECs have an approved terms of reference, broadly speaking, with a few that don't. And this might also be because of where they are in their development. Are reports on organizational ethics management submitted to the SEC? So what is interesting, and I just want to add a bit of extraneous information, but the Ethics Practitioner Survey, which looks at ethics management in organizations, was also run during this year. And it was established there that more than 80% of the ethics management functions in organizations are done on a part-time basis. And this is fascinating. So this is where that data comes from. It comes from that ethics management function in the organization. And the question was, you know, are reports on organizational ethics management submitted by this part-time or full-time function to the SEC? And we have 76% of SECs saying yes, with 21% saying no, so about 1 in 5, and then 3% saying sometimes. So it does indicate that the far majority do receive reports, but there are still a considerable minority that do not receive reports on ethics management. And this is a bit problematic. How does the SEC react to what is happening within the organization without receiving this information? All right, now we also asked, you know, are SEC matters on the board agenda? And what's interesting is we had almost an inversion of numbers this year around. 87% in 2020 said yes, SEC matters are on the board agenda. This year it corrected to 78%, so still the vast majority are there. With 15%, this is where we had the largest increase in 2021 of SECs saying that matters are an ad hoc item in board meetings. And then lastly, a substantial drop there, 2% from 7% last year, that SEC matters are usually discussed under other matters at the end of board meetings. So it is good to see that we still have clout here, but there is still this ad hoc attitude to some extent in a small minority. Then what we did find was that the Social Ethics Committee truly found its voice at the AGM. And what you can see here is that the SEC activities are reported to the AGM through both a written and verbal report. Now, colleagues, my personal feeling is that this is probably higher because of COVID and virtual work, where most meetings are now done in a virtual, verbal, as well as written setting. But it's encouraging to see that 53% of the SEC said that it is done in both a written and verbal report. Substantial decrease in only a written report, about 26%, and then slight increase for SEC activities that are not reported, which is a little bit worrying. And then lastly, slight decrease to 9% versus 11% last year, that SEC activities are reported to the AGM through a verbal report only. Now let's look at where the SECs invest most of their time. Now, colleagues, there's a lot of data here, but if you look at them, they are ranked in order. And the question is, where does the SEC spend most of its time? And what's fascinating is in 2020, this was mostly focused around employee health and wellness, particularly because we think this was a COVID effect, and it's not uncommon for the SEC to change its focus slightly depending on the contexts in which they operate. I don't think we should see that as negative, but what is positive is that organizational ethics now takes the first spot, which is really what the SEC should be doing, followed very closely by employee safety and health. Thirdly, broad-based Black economic empowerment, particularly transformation and employment equity issues. Then fraud and corruption prevention, stakeholder relationships, employee relationships, community development, and then lastly, donations and sponsorships. In terms of where they spend the least of their time, colleagues, well, if we start at the top there, and this is worrying, especially since the climate change conference is going, is climate change mitigation. This is something that falls on the lower tier for most social and ethics committees, as well as biodiversity, and then followed by advertising, responsible and transparent tax practices, consumer protection, and then pollution. So what we can say without a shadow of a doubt is that the climate and the environment is taking a back seat for SECs in South Africa. We also asked which operational departments or divisions regularly attend SEC meetings. It is very encouraging to see that the CEO, MD, or Director General, the lead person in the organization, is still at #1 spot at 20%, down from 21% last year. Human resources also appears to be very involved, and this was very similar to last year. And this year, compliance follows that, with risk just below, and then we have the ethics management function, in sort of 5th place there. So it's interesting to see that, who attends these meetings, but you can notice here that it's mostly, the governance cluster and the heads of these sort of risk associated and human resource or human capital departments that tend to engage the most. And this is not unexpected. It actually paints a picture of who is involved, and it's great to see that there is a spread across. I'm worried that finance is not that involved because, of course, we do require substantial budget for any ethics interventions and for any mitigation or strategy intervention over time. So I think that is something to look at going forward. All right, so let's look at some of the vital statistics of the SEC. And what we present here are quite a number of statistics because we want to get a good feeling for what's going on. But firstly, we asked how many members does your SEC consist of? And the average is still 5 this year. And then how many members of so on average 5 members in the SEC exist. And how many members of your SEC are non-executive directors? On average, again, remained about the same. It is 3 year on year. But what is very interesting was the annual remuneration. And we actually relied on the IoDSA and to look at the data that they've collected over a large number, I think it is about 248 organizations, regarding what the income was for different committees. And we'll get to that in a second. But interestingly enough, it corrected considerably from 2020 to 148,201. This correction is due to the fact that this data is based on members as well as chairpersons, and not just chairpersons as last year. So the truth is the annual remuneration on average is about 148,201 rands, which is interesting, and we'll show you where that ranks. We also looked at the number of invitees who attend SEC meetings. On average, this is 4, no change from last year. How often does the SEC meet per year or every 12 months? Interestingly, this dropped to 3 on average in 2021, with 4 on average in 2020. The other question, how often are reports on ethics management submitted to the SEC? Again, the average is about 3, 1 for about 3 of the quarters, and When was the last time the SEC terms of reference was reviewed? And again, it was within, colleagues, the last year. However, we also had some that didn't review them from 2014, which is a bit worrying as well. In terms of the remuneration of the SEC, and I'm not going to steal my colleagues' thunder here, because I'm sure they want to talk about how this relates to the legitimacy of the SEC, if it's still seen as important and a legitimate function. But the Audit Committee ranked highest with 232,105 Rand on average per annum. The Remuneration Committee with 199,751 Rand per annum. The Risk Committee then drops substantially to 164,894 Rand per annum. And then the Social and Ethics Committee takes up the second lowest spot at 148,201 Rand per annum. The Nominations Committee was the only committee that had a lower income than the Social and Ethics Committee for members per annum. And it's interesting because the Nominations Committee or the Nomination Committee is often an ad hoc committee. So I wonder what this says about the nature of SECs. What's also interesting is, and I'm going to give some firepower to my colleagues later, is that SECs are some of the most female board committees. And the question is that income related to that? If we look at the impact of the SEC and the clarity of the mandate, so we asked the chairpersons, to what extent does the SEC add value? This is comparable to last year, a substantial amount. The least value, or the thing that had the lowest score here was, does the Companies Act provide enough guidance on SEC operations, with a very much lower score. What is interesting, however, is that there has been improvement in 2021. So we noticed that there's a little bit more clarity with the Companies Act, as well as a little bit more clarity with the King 4 report. And this is partly, I think, because of some of the developments that have happened, especially with practice notes and so on. How important is the SEC in comparison to other committees? Seen as very important, very similar to last year. And how effective is the SEC? Slightly higher ranked this year. Now, colleagues, let's look at the mandate challenges, or those things that challenge the SEC in doing its job effectively. And what is interesting is these are also ranked from highest to lowest. And you can see that the most challenging element here was the role or mandate of the SEC not being understood in the organization. So what is interesting is, the SEC is still a bit of a mystery, it appears, to the rest of the organization. And we hear a lot of words in practice, such as it is a soft or fluffy issue. And I think we really have to shake this assumption. So we have to be clear of what the SEC does in the organization. I think that it is worrying that it is not yet understood well outside of the SEC. The second one was an interesting one, the fact that the SEC focuses way too much on compliance at the expense of actual oversight in the organization. And you can say that this relates very much to that purpose of building an ethical culture. So to what extent is the SEC getting bogged down in compliance-related concerns instead of building a values-based ethical culture? Also, at some of the other challenges, I'm just going to mention them in passing, the SEC's agenda being too broad, so not focusing on what it needs to do. And again, this comes back to that SEC sometimes focus on certain things for periods of time, and that's okay. But it appears that in many cases, it is so broad, they're not really getting to much, having much impact in any area. The scope and guidelines provided by legislation not being clear enough still came up as a challenge for many SECs, and the SEC being viewed as unimportant, colleagues, in comparison to other committees. And then we start, seeing it drop down considerably lower towards the end. So the one that actually had, how can I say, that almost never happens or happens very little, was a lack of commitment from SEC members, so saying that they are actually committed, and of course that there is funding available and resources to the SEC. So I think that there is a legitimacy concern beyond that, and also what we do as the SEC that comes through clearly, and this compliance approach. In conclusion, I think that the results are quite promising. There were some real big positives that came out of the survey. Firstly, it appears that most SECs are established, as we've said earlier, for proactive reasons. There is, of course, higher reporting of activities at the AGM. So we said that the SEC is starting to find its voice, perhaps mitigated by Zoom and Teams. And then a high level of confidence in the impact of the SEC remains, that it is an important function, and that there is more clarity, although marginal, in terms of guidance of SEC operations, as well as particularly with respect to King IV and the Companies Act. In terms of the challenges that remain, firstly, the SEC remuneration is still low. And the question, of course, is how much is it really worth to the organization? And an old professor of mine used to say, if you want to know what an organization cares about, look at where it spends its money. The mandate of the SEC is still poorly understood throughout the organization. And I think this is something that the SEC needs to act as a public relations and communications exercise. What do we do? What is our worth? What are we looking at in the organization? What are we adding? And making that mandate clear to employees and to others in the organization. Then the SEC seems also to focus more, again, on compliance at the expense of effective oversight. And this is something that we need, that can come with good training, or maybe in just focusing the SEC a little bit differently in terms of governance of ethics. But it has to maintain that effective oversight. If it gets bogged down and can't see the wood for the trees, it's not going to be able to make a good impact. And then lastly, SEC is claiming that they have too broad an agenda again. So too much to do and not focusing on doing one or two things effectively in the organization. Deon, thank you so much. I feel like a weatherman reporting the statistics, but I hope that that's given people some view, that second candle in the dark room of what SECs are about, and some findings that very much correlate to last year as well. So we're seeing a pattern emerge.
Thanks, Paul. And I think your candle in the dark metaphor is quite apt here, because as these surveys will continue, I think we will get an ever more reliable picture on what is happening. And one can expect slight deviations just because the sample profile also differed from what it was last year. But all in all, I think there are some quite clear patterns. And yeah, we look forward to digesting what you have presented to us, Paul. And at this point, I would like to invite our two panelists, Langa Royds and Fatima Rawat, to please come on camera so that I can just introduce them. Netombi, I will start with you. And Netombi has a long track record, specifically in the environment of human capital development. She's a very, very experienced non-executive director, serving on 5+ social and ethics committees since the introduction of this committee, and also chairing quite a number of them. So Netombi, we are very privileged to have you and to learn from your experience. We look forward to your contribution. And then our second panelist is Fatima Rawat. Fatima has a background in law and governance. She's also a subject matter expert in organizational ethics, a colleague at the Ethics Institute as well. She's a certified director and also a member of the IoD Social and Ethics Committee Forum. And Fatima, I'm going to start with you just in terms of some general impressions that you were left with, having listened to Paul, but also having had the opportunity to read through the full report before our session this morning. So Fatima, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, Deon, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of the discussion today. I was really encouraged by the survey findings, and it's good to see the positive indication that social and ethics committees are starting to find their voice, and there's increased levels of confidence in social and ethics committees. One of the things that also interested me was to see the increase in the number of NPOs that are starting to report, which I found particularly interesting, which also starts to talk to me about the fact that beyond the compliance aspect, we are increasingly starting to find organizations proactively establishing social and ethics committees as a way of building trust within their organizations, and not just because of the legislative push. So even though we understand the importance of the legislative push, and as the survey has shown us, the impact of the Companies Act, we are increasingly starting to see this trend across beyond just corporates, which is positive. It's also positive to see that social and ethics committees are taking their jobs more seriously, and we can seriously see this from the rich findings of the survey. What was interesting for me was that even though we've had the Companies Act coming to effect since May 2012, and we've got the Ethics Institute handbooks, which provide guidance on social and ethics committees. And we've recently had the practice note, which provides further guidance based on King to social and ethics committees. There still remains a need for further clarity on the role of the social and ethics committee. And as Paul was highlighting, even the survey shows us that there continues to be a lack of clarity around the mandate of social and ethics committee. And this points us to some serious work that continues to need to be done. And as the IoD Social and Ethics Committee Forum, we've picked up on that, and what we're planning to do is to be able to draw guidelines to social and ethics committees on the areas that are starting to be highlighted, so that we can try to address this gap in a way that will allow social and ethics committees to become more functional. I guess the other thing also for me that's important is the fact that sexual and ethics committees are still being combined with other committees, and that tends to dilute the effectiveness of social and ethics committees, because eventually what you find is that the social and ethics committee issues are generally shoved to the back, and if we don't have the time, it's the ones that we compromise on the most. And ideally, we do want to see more dedicated social and ethics committees coming out, so that we can give effect to the conversations that we need to. From a technical perspective, the one thing that concerns me, and Paul picked up on this also, is the fact that there's such a close link between the operational ethics management function within our organizations and the ability of the Social and Ethics Committee to play its oversight role in terms of ethics management. And if we have this juncture where most of our ethics management functions are being done on a part-time basis, as we've picked up in the ethics practitioner survey, it does compromise on the effectiveness of the Social and Ethics Committee to play its governance and oversight role. I also picked up that in terms of the attendance of operational members from within organizations, you see the ethics office being further down the chain, and that very well may be that fewer organizations have dedicated ethics offices within their organization, and in fact the ethics function may be done by others on a part-time or a quarter-time basis. And that's something that over time, as we mature, that if we give credence to the seriousness of the ethics function within our organization, that we want to see elevated. Perhaps the last thing that I would also pick up on is just the fact that the survey does talk about diversity from a gender perspective and a race perspective. But the other thing that I think we should also start to become mindful of is the composition of Social and Ethics Committee from a skills perspective. And that's important so that the Social and Ethics Committee can achieve its intended mandate. And there are intended amendments to the Companies Act, which are in discussion. And I know that the IoD and the King Committee have made submissions to this legislative process to have an inclusion placed in the Companies Act where the board composition should include a skills basis that's wide enough that all of our committees are able to fulfill their functions effectively. And I think that's an important positive change that we're starting to see from a legislative perspective. I'll wind up there, Deon, just to say that the one thing that concerns me remains, how do you make Social and Ethics Committee more relevant and raise the legitimacy? And I think the critical thing is, are we doing enough to link the value of the Social and Ethics Committees to the strategic purpose of our organizations? And the better we get at doing that, the more effective our Social and Ethics Committees would be. Thanks, Deon.
Thanks for that input, Fatima. And I'm glad to see that there's already quite a number of questions coming in on the Q&A. And we will attend to that. By the way, I saw that someone there asked, isn't there an example of a well-drafted Social and Ethics Committee in terms of reference or charter? And Vicky or Julie, I think if you can maybe just post a link in the chat function to that template that we developed at the Social and Ethics Committee Forum, it is something that might be useful not only to the person who posed the question, but also to others. And please just do that in the chat for us. Natombi, over to you. I'm very curious to hear what your takeaways are after studying this report.
Okay, good. Thank you. Morning, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity again, Deon. And yeah, a lot of what I gleaned from reading the report has been covered between Paul and Fatima and yourself to a certain extent. But I just thought, when I first read it, I thought, let me just take off all the hats that I wear and just look at it, purely and say, what do I think about this report? And so I'm going to share some of those initial thoughts that came through, and then sort of look at what some of my, sort of more considered thoughts might be. So the first thing is that what really struck me, and I was excited by it, was the fact that it would seem that a lot of the social and ethics people or chairpersons or participants in this particular survey were female, right? And that's a good thing, right? And that's a very good thing. It also goes against perhaps the grain that there's a perception that females can't function on boards, right? So, there's room, so, watch out accountants, the females are on the way, or watch out males, actually, the females are on the way, so, that's a good, it's a little gap that can be used, right? So then I asked myself, does it feel true? Because as Deon says, I've been sitting on social and ethics committee meetings for quite some time, and it felt true. So there's authenticity in a lot of what came through, and for me, I'm grateful for that. I was disturbed by the fact that the remuneration is the way that it is, right? However, I also looked at it and said to myself, when things are new, right, traditionally we don't put too much emphasis on them, right? And therefore, we would then, if you look at risk, for instance, under risk and audit, when risk first came up, nobody really knew what they were doing and they didn't want to pay them very much and they were not very excited. Today, they're more excited about them. So we have to build traction, right, as social and ethics participants, right? In terms of commitment, also, I was very concerned that it shows a lack of enough commitment from the board as a whole and therefore corporates as a whole, right? However, we've got COP 26, which has just happened, and the whole conversation around ESG, I do believe that will open up the opportunity for traction. And links back to that issue of qualification. So who are the people that we would need on that board to ensure that we discuss the right things, right, around environment and not get waylaid and distracted by whatever is the catch to, is the excitement at the moment. Like, for instance, carbon emissions at the moment. Everybody's talking about carbon emissions and it's important, right? But there are other elements on the environment like biodiversity and the food issues, right? The food sustainability and water that are important, right? But everybody's talking about carbon emissions, sometimes I think to the detriment of the water, drinkable water debate that we need to have, right? As an example, right? So yes, there'll be some traction there, and I'm excited by that. And as I said, with the remuneration, I was, very disappointed with the fact that, that remuneration is lower, and I don't believe it should be, because I do believe that it's important that we have consistency in all the committees, if indeed we believe that our board needs to be as diverse, right? And as able to participate in all the debates that the corporate is confronted with, then the people who are part of it shouldn't be some better than or less than or whatever, and goes to qualifications as well. And my colleague on a different forum often shares this comparison in terms of the remuneration to say, when audit committee members, right, the results don't come out the way that they want, and their impairments or vested share options that go crazy, we don't re-elect them, right? We don't think of them as less, we rather just sort of vote them down a little bit and give them a little warning, As for the social and ethics ones, we don't even give them a chance to have a voice yet, right? And so I'm excited about that possibility with regard to the Companies Act. Right? I think that it does also talk to high compliance culture, right, in terms of corporates and the participants in corporate environments, the people who make decisions. And that concerns me to a certain extent, because if we're going to survive whatever it is that Corona and COVID is trying to tell us, and the universe is trying to tell us, we have to be innovative and we have to be frisky, so to speak, and able to adjust and able to take risk. And if we're compliance orientated, right, and controlled by compliance, we're not going to take the chances that we need to take to survive, right? And so, yeah, so I was a bit concerned about that. And of course, you know, something that Paul raised around the lack of financial involvement, because everything costs money and a lot of it is money. But I think it's not only money costs that we should measure. We should check the human cost, the social cost, the corporate cost, you know, all the other costs that come with the things that social and ethics needs to touch on, or at least bring to the surface. And very finally, that the issue of qualification. You know, we have traditionally looked at NEDs and said NEDs must be lawyers, well, depending on the particular sector, you know, have some sort of technical skill that is related to the particular sector, right? However, I think the world that we're going to is saying we need to bring in people of varying and diverse qualification. So the days of calling the greenie beanies and forgetting about them, right, are over, right? The days of saying that we don't actually need people who understand biodiversity, people who understand the animal movement, the chemical process that occurs when rainwater forms, that is too acid and the food link, the people who deal with social issues, right, and behavioral issues, forensics, you know, are over. And we can not only glorify, and I know there's a couple of accountant colleagues of mine who are sitting on this call, you know, my apologies, present company excluded, you know, but you know what I'm talking about, the days of honoring and making the accountants the most important people on the board, or even in the process of recruitment of executives, right, are, I think, over. You know, we went from accounting to engineering to some legal, you know, little bit of here. We really need to look at having diverse board members so that we can get through what we need to get through. And I'm going to leave it at there, and, you know, we can talk some more.
Yeah, and I think it's an extremely strong point on which you finished there, Tombi, that the whole idea that you really need that diversity of skills and perspective if you want to advance the best interest of the organization that you serve. And especially within a very challenging triple context in which we find ourselves, concerning both the environment, the society, and obviously now also the huge environmental challenges that we face. I would like to delve into a number of issues, and I will start integrating as we go along also some comments and questions from our audience. And can I please encourage you to post more questions and put more comments in the Q&A, please. Fatima, you used the word dilution. And I think if we look at a number of findings, it seems as if there is some watering down of the Social and Ethics Committee. If we just compare 2020 with 2021, it's still a very short period. But for example, we've seen that the Social and Ethics Committee as a standalone committee, last year, 84% of Social and Ethics Committees were standalone committees. This year, only 69, a 15 percentage point drop there. Also, if we look at the preferred name of the committee, last year, 65% of Social and Ethics Committees were called by that name. This year, it dropped to 55%, which is not necessarily a problem, because we've seen an increase in committees calling them Social Ethics and Transformation Committees or Social Ethics and Sustainability Committees, which I don't regard as a dilution, but more emphasis that committees want to emphasize that a key part of their work is either transformation or sustainability. So it's not taking anything away from the rest of the mandate, but clearly a focus on matters that are material. And then Frederick Leketi in the Q&A also asked, what do you think is the cause of the drop in the average number of meetings of the Social and Ethics Committee? And you might have noted that it dropped from 4 to 3 from 2020 to this year. Natombi and Fatima, you can decide who go first. What do you read into these figures? Do you see a slight drop in interest, a slight marginalization of social and ethics committees, or how do you read these signs of the time?
Fatima?
Yeah, I mean, I do think COVID has tested us, and it tests the way that we engage, and part of that partly may be attributed to the way in which engagements are taking place. I mean, I do think that outside of formal meetings, we do find that there are tending to be more ad hoc engagements that tend to happen, and that very well may also be an indication of the sign of the times, Deon. So I think there are a number of complexities at play that one needs to consider, but it's very encouraging to see that social and ethics committees are actively engaging on the issues that they have at hand. So I think that the number of meetings doesn't necessarily equate to the effectiveness that the Social and Ethics Committee has in terms of engaging with the strategic issues that they're being faced with. Ntombi, your take?
I think you're right, but I also do have a sense, and I really have no empirical evidence around it. I just have a sense that perhaps because of where we've been, right, within the last 18 months, there's an element of, hey, just hang on a bit. We've got to get the numbers right because the profits aren't coming in, you know. And so let's have less of that and more of this, because, by the way, social and ethics deals with a whole lot of stuff that we generally aren't comfortable with, because it's all the intangible stuff and the so-called soft but hard stuff, as I often refer to it as. And with the rise of things like, in our South African context, the debate around gender-based violence, psychological and behavioral tendencies that have come through, corporates aren't ready to deal with that stuff. It's a lot easier to figure out how to make sure that, we get the profits up, so to speak, than to worry about, how are we going to deal with Ntombi when her head is going mad, when she loses her cool, Let's rather leave that in the Department of Health, Yeah, so I'm being flippant, but I'm just really trying to show the debate that is faced, and I mean, with the greatest respect to a lot of boards, that this is not stuff that they traditionally were trained to deal with, and so the people who make the chairpersons of the boards, the various chairpersons of the boards, the various CEOs don't easily discuss these things, because, as I said earlier, they're said to be soft, but in fact, my view is that they're quite hard.
Paul, I see that you have a hand up. Yes, please.
Yes, sorry, colleagues. I'm sorry to come into the conversation here from left field, but I just want to add something to that in terms of the number of meetings. So what we did find was there was a few social and ethics committees that partook in this year's survey that were relatively new. And you could see that by their membership. Chairperson saying, I'm here, but we have got no members yet. We might be established this year. But if you look at the median result, the median, I think there is a little bit more of a better indicator. It's exactly the same as last year, 4. So it looks like, we can confidently say that every quarter there is at least, some engagement there. So colleagues, I just wanted to just bring that in. I don't think that it necessarily indicates that there's lower or less. I just think that it is perhaps the makeup of our sample, just from a cold statistical look at the data. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I also noted that, and I think it is important to not only look at the average, as you always say, the mean is probably a better indicator of the midpoint of the distribution of your sample. I want us to look at another aspect where there was quite a considerable increase, and that is the reporting at the AGM, at the annual general meeting of the company. And I think the leading practice, and what we really would like to see, is that there is both a verbal and a written report, a short, high-level verbal report, but then complemented by a longer a written report that most probably forms part of your integrated annual report. And then we've seen an increase from 30% of respondents last year who indicated that there's both a written and a verbal report to 53%, which is very significant. It's close to a doubling. And I was wondering, Ntombi, from your experience, why do you think we see this quite dramatic increase? But then I would also like both Ntombi and Fatima to respond to also how you interpret the proposed amendments to the Companies Act that we've now seen in the Companies Amendment Bill that puts a lot more emphasis on the report by the Social and Ethics Committee to the AGM, also to the extent that that report must now be approved. It's not only for shareholders to take note of that, but the proposal is that there should be an ordinary vote. And if the shareholders don't pass that report, in other words, they don't approve that report, then there are all types of mechanisms that kick in terms of consulting with dissenting shareholders. So, Ntombi, can we start with you this time? Okay. Why do you think we see this increase? And let me also hear your take on the Companies Amendment Bill.
Yeah. I think really, to be quite honest, I think the increase has happened because of what's been going on in the ESG world, right? And the demand for higher recruitment, higher engagement of these issues, right? And I think, in the South African context, we're finding now that, companies are competing to be the best, right? So you have the sustainability report, index, and what, and people want to look good, right? So they want to participate. I do have a bit of a concern that the sustainability report is being separated from the IR report, right? And so that, sort of the practice I've seen is that sustainability report, we look at it on the website, but here at the AGM, we want to talk about the numbers, right? And yes, the Social and Ethics Committee chair can prepare a little report, but it's like a highlight and, often not read out in the meeting. It's just sort of handed out and any questions, and nobody has got questions. So there's a bit of a responsibility around the analysts and the participants, the shareholder participants at the AGM to ensure that they have questions to ask, right? Of course, sometimes they don't even have questions for the audit committee anyway, right? So an interesting combination, right? I'm one of those who really likes the idea of the report being shared, the report being discussed, and the growing happening from the conversation and engagement that ensues as a result of that. Because there's a lot of things that are going on that people need to know and share, right? And best practice, how to deal with things. I will go to the example of what has happened recently in our country in July with all the unrest, right? I really believe that it would have been far worse for a lot of companies if there had not been the kind, not that it's the best, but some level of social interaction that occurred, right? So that the corporate then begins to be not belonging to some JSC shareholders, but belonging to us as a community as well. So we feel that we need to get involved with the way that it runs. I mean, the stories are many, you'll see them all over social media and as well as mainstream media of how communities rose up and said, no, we're not going to allow looting. And even the dreaded Black Taxi Association and Black Taxis, they formed around certain buildings, formed a chain of security to say we are not going to carry anybody with looted goods, right? Nor are we taking people to go and loot goods, and that nobody asked them. Nobody went and made a presentation and delegation and made the request and made promises. They just felt that this was the right thing to do. Right? Number of community members who said, we will stay up all night, and July is cold in South Africa. We will stay up all night and we will protect those malls where we know we are, or those buildings where we know that we are, benefiting as a community, or whatever their reasoning was, right? To the, all of us expected the security services to do something, right? And they didn't do anything, or didn't do enough, and so, yes, there were some savings which were made because of this community involvement and etc. So I'm really one who says it's important that we integrate these things and get them working. Now I went off on a tangent and I forgot what the second part of your question was. Because you can see I'm quite passionate about some of these things.
It was about your comments on the proposed new format of the Social and Ethics Committee report.
Okay. The amendments. I think that it's a good thing, right? But I do believe it's important that we treat everybody the same, right? So if we're going to, one of the elements is electing the Social and Ethics Committee annually, like we do the Audit Committee, great, right? We'll do the same thing for remuneration, right? In the same way, the report must be presented, the report must be engaged with, right? If it doesn't pass, then let's have a conversation with the shareholders, and the shareholders must be willing to come and say why, they're not happy, and why they've voted it down, and why they think that it's not the right thing to do, right? And not just make a big noise and, blow a whole lot of smoke and then decide, no, actually we made a mistake, and that kind of thing which happens in the remuneration side, right? They must be willing to engage understanding that the Social and Ethics Committee have been given the responsibility to take the company forward. So we may not always agree, right, with aspersions or the suggestions for change, but we can talk about them, because it is in talking about them together that we actually develop the right sort of way forward, right? So those are my views. I like it, but I think we must be consistent across, and therefore when we come and things like that, there must also be consistency. We can't have a committee not giving anything and every other committee having everything. It's not fair.
Okay, Tommy, and I was really amused by watching what is going on in the chat. Many people said we love the passion, so no problem getting carried away. It's actually appreciated. Fatima, your take specifically on the SEC report to the AGM, but also the amended proposals?
Yes, I mean, I think, I guess two main takeaways for me, when what we're seeing in the survey may very well be attributed a lot to the virtual environment, as Paul also picked up on, which is why we're seeing more reporting by social and ethics committees to AGMs. But I thought, Deon, that the intended legislative changes are actually an indication from the legislator, which adds to the relevance and the legitimacy of social and ethics committees. And that goes a long ways towards putting an emphasis on the importance of social and ethics committees within our organizations and their relevance from a strategic perspective. But I also thought my other key takeaway was from an accountability perspective, because it does place that level of accountability that if our social and ethics committees have a responsibility to govern our social and ethics in a way to ensure the achievement of those governance outcomes of ethical culture, of effective control, of trust. Are they doing that in a way meaningfully? And that report gives a way for the broader shareholder management to hold that to account. So I thought those were very positive changes that were coming from the legislator. I think maybe just the last thing, Ntombi, your passionate acclaim just reminds me about the trust element and the fact that when we talk about organizational ethics, we're really talking about how we apply our values and conduct ourselves in a way that we we have the interest of our stakeholders on board and the impact that we have on broader society. And when I hear you, it also speaks to that broader question. Are our organizational values just sitting somewhere aside, or are we living them and applying them in the way in which we conduct ourselves and the consideration that we have on the impact of what we do? Thanks, Deon.
Okay, and Fatima, I want to follow up with a question I think specifically directed to you by Anne-Marie Steyn, and told me there's also one directed to you after that coming, but let's start with Anne-Marie Steyn, who asks, please elaborate on what the functions and responsibilities of operational ethics officer or ethics manager might include.
Sure. So at an operational level, the function of an ethics officer or an ethics manager would be to effectively manage the ethics function within the organization. So effectively within the Ethics Institute, we have the governance of ethics framework, and that unpacks the ethics management element in quite a lot of detail. And if I can quickly summarize, essentially before we go off and manage the ethics within our institutions, we need to first understand what are the things in our reality that undermine our organizations from being ethical. And we do that by way of an ethics risk assessment. Once we understand that reality, the next step would be to develop an ethics strategy with the leadership voices within your organization. Where are we headed? What is our vision? How are we going to get there? That's an implementation plan. We do a quick checks and balances of our codes and policies. Are they speaking to the vision that we want to do? Are we aligned? And then we go off and we make ethics real within our organization. We institutionalize ethics through training, through awareness raising, through continuous efforts. And then the role of the ethics office or the ethics management role would be to monitor those activities and to report to the Social and Ethics Committee around effectively what is being done to manage ethics. So it's not a once-off, it's a continuous basis. And that connectivity between the ethics management function and the ethics committee from a governance perspective is so critical, so that the ethics Social and Ethics Committee is effectively able to exercise its governance role. I hope I've kind of summarized that effectively, Deon.
No, I think you did it well, and I think it's good to point just everyone to that Social and Ethics Committee practice note again that was issued early this year. That also ties the mandate of the Social and Ethics Committee to the second principle of King 2 or of King 4, principle 2 of King 4, the one that speaks about the governing body governing the ethics of the organization in a manner that supports the establishment of an ethical culture. And in my interaction with social and ethics committees, I often find that they struggle not so much with the ethics management part. They find that relative easily because they most probably know what are the things that should be done around codes and communication and whistleblowing lines and the like. But when it comes to that cultural aspect, in other words, determining whether the ethical culture of the organization is maturing, I often find that they still struggle. And hopefully we will return to this because there are also other questions related to this. But I want to ask you specifically, there was a question, Natombi, and whenever we talk about social and ethics committees, the one issue that predictably always comes up is the relationship between the Social and Ethics Committee and other board committees, whether it's the Audit Committee, the Risk Committee, the Remuneration Committee, the Human Capital Committee, and specifically on the whole matter of environmental impact. There is a specific question by Ronell that asks, is it possible that the environmental matters are focused on by the Risk Committee and not specifically by the Social and Ethics Committee? Or is it the case of both committees focusing on the same matter, and that is my part of the question, but from different perspectives? So it's not a duplication of effort, but rather different angles from which they approach a matter such as your environmental impact.
I think that, for instance, from my perspective, I've always seen the Social and Ethics Committee being the assurance or the assurer of good governance, right? On the boardroom table. So whether the Social and Ethics Committee physically does all the measurements and checks it, the environmental concerns or not, for me is not really relevant, right? At the end of the day, when we sign off on the IR report and we stand with our hands on our hearts and say, we've done everything that we can for ethics, we must be assured as the Social and Ethics Committee that that work was done or that work is being done. Right, so that's where I start. Right, I sit on one of the boards that I sit on. The issues around health, safety, and environment are not part of the Social and Ethics Committee mandate. Right, but I ask on an annual cycle, what's happening? Right. How do we know that that's true? And of course, that comes when we get to the IR report, which I have to sign off, because I have to sign off the sustainability report. And then I start to say, I never saw anything about this stuff in the board meeting. So guys, where did that come from? You know, and when did it happen and how did it happen? And I have to assure myself, right, that in fact it was done. Right. So I do believe there is overlap, and there's a lot of overlap in terms of what social and ethics does, right? Because, for instance, fair and responsible pay. Right? Is that a REMCO issue, right? Or is it a social and ethics thing, right? Is it fair that we still have to have that conversation around the highest paid and the lowest paid? And are we giving our staff enough, right? Numbers, as in remuneration, won't necessarily answer the question, but a combination of the numbers and the thing and the ethical things that we do and the social things that we do will answer the question for the reader. So there is a lot of, but I think, you know, it's about dividing the work so that it works out fairly, and it also depends on what skills you have on your committee. But when you present that that IR report, it must have a full picture and because that's what the team is about, isn't it? Right.
Yeah, and of course it's also a form of combined assurance. And I think something that I've already seen causing quite some anxiety, once again in the company's amendment bill, is that in future the chairperson of the Social and Ethics Committee has to formally attest that there was no non-compliance with everything within their statutory mandate, and I think this is something that might cause not only anxiety but also much more discussion. Let's move on to the areas, in other words, the priorities for Social and Ethics Committees. And if I look at the top four, they sound just about right. Because the first one is organizational ethics. Given what has happened in our country, everything exposed at the Zondo Commission, we know that there's a lot of focus needed on building strong ethical cultures. The second one is employee safety and health. And in the time of COVID, once again, one would expect Social and Ethics Committees to focus on that. The same goes for transformation, both BBBEE and also employment equity being areas of priority. And then, of course, fraud and corruption. And once again, we just need to mention Zondo Commission in order to understand why this is a priority. But then if we move to the bottom of the list, in other words, the areas most neglected, I think what really worries me there is the lack of focus on environmental matters, environmental impact, and also climate change. And then very surprisingly also consumer protection, that those aren't priorities. And I saw that Jaswant Gordon also said in the Q&A, since the least time is spent on the environment, it may be relevant to incorporate feedback from the COP events also to Social and Ethics Committees. Can I ask both of you, what do you think can we do? I think at the top of the list, we're most probably all comfortable and say, yes, these are areas of priorities. But what are worrying are those things sitting at the bottom, those things that don't get the necessary attention, and specifically around environmental issues. What do you think can be done to promote the interest and the priority of Social and Ethics Committees on these matters?
Can I go? Or
yes,
Fatima?
please do.
I think that, you know what, one of the concerns that was raised was the fact that the agenda is very broad, right? So I think that what has happened is that it is in fact quite broad, but the way that we've managed the agenda over 4 meetings, right, becomes important. Right. So when social and ethics committees first started, you know, I also was like, oh my goodness, there's so much, you know, how do we handle it? We only got 4 meetings in the year. And, you know, and by the way, we don't have a whole day's meeting. We only have 2-hour meeting. And how do you manage that time? So one of the things that I started to do in my committees is to work, rather than work on a 12-month cycle, work on a 24-month cycle, so that I have got 8 meetings to cover the entire agenda. So there are certain things that I would only deal with once in 2 years, right? And there are certain things that have to be done more frequently, right? So maybe that's one way to make sure that you increase the agenda time. Also, perhaps make a little bit longer meeting and then roll the agenda, right? So rather than every meeting do the minutes, you know, because minutes are always take a lot of time. And I'm one of those who says, look at the minutes at home, right? And then come back and come with substantive changes. Don't come and tell me about an S which is missing from the word. You know, that's not, it's not use of proper time in my view, right? So as committee members, do that all prior, and we do that at the bottom of the agenda. So then we have a focus or a theme for each meeting. So if that meeting is focused on, let's say, transformation, then we deal with all the elements, right, that we need to deal with around transformation and focus on that, and then have a shorter part with report backs, and then a very small part with dealing with the minutes themselves, right? So that's one way of actually dealing with it. But as I said before, I do think these environmental issues are going to become more topical, right? We've received a lot of money as a country from great nations of the world. You know, we live in a world where we've gone through the Zondo Commission, and we are now going to be extra sensitive, not only the Zondo Commission, but also the PPE scandals, etc., around health. So we're going to have to be far more astute and involved in how that money is spent. I think it will just happen, obviously there'll be some attempt to do what they want to do with it. But then, the social consciousness of people is raised, right? If we look at our election outcome, right, it has shown that things are not the way, it's not business as usual, and so people are far more alert, right? And therefore want to get involved in what will happen. So that coming out, the fact that it's come out from the COP cohort, the fact that there's a movement all over the world, the fact that we've got such high levels of poverty, not only poverty as we previously understood it, not having anything, but, there's a lot of people who've got houses but are poor. There's high levels of poverty there, so that urban poverty is a big issue, right? Because the crime levels have increased, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I mean, Johannesburg water, those of us in Johannesburg, especially today, we know we've got low pressure because they're fixing some pipes, which they should have fixed 10 years ago, right? We've got the example of Eskom, which has had maintenance problems, right? Which we haven't been able to resolve. So are we going to go into that crisis mode again with water, right? In a world where we should have enough water, So I think that the world that we live in, it will be constantly reminding us that we need to be socially active, right? And doing something about these things, right? Because by the way, if none of those things happen, the profit still won't come, so yeah. So I think that it will change. And of course, we've got younger people, a lot of young people who don't have work, who have been stuck behind computers when they can, in terms of online and being at home. And they're very, very, very active on the social media. So they will start to make a noise and make sure that we discuss these issues. We corporates are forced not to hide stuff and put it under the carpet, but to bring it out into the open and respond. I often share, in this context, what happened to Clicks and Tresemme, and of course Unilever as a result, or H&M, or whatever. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has happened because of the activism of younger people who are the majority of our society. And we've got to respond.
Yeah. Fatima, would you like to add to that?
Maybe just from a technical perspective, the question you asked about those on the bottom end, for me, it asks the question around, are we as social and ethics committees investing enough time in understanding our mandate, understanding our responsibilities, and planning around it? So principles 3 and 4 of King become very important, because if you look at principle 3 of King, when it talks about organizations being seen to be good corporate citizens, it unpacks those into 4 quadrants, and it then requires social and ethics committees to apply their minds and say, what does this mean, and are we doing it? And then when we look at principle 4, it's then aligning our work plan of the social and ethics committee to the strategic purpose of the organization. And that, if we go back and we spend time and we invest in thinking through that as a collective, once we've got our foundation in place, our skills, our diversity, before we hit the ground running, we invest that time in thinking, then we're less likely to see the type of stats that we're doing. But if we're being more reactive than proactive, then we're more likely to see what we're doing. So I think it's always a good idea at the start of a year or at the inception of a social and ethics committee to invest that time in some sort of strategic planning processes so that we can achieve our mandate and objectives as intended.
Okay, thank you. Natombi, a question directed to you by someone with the surname of Malapane. I'm not sure whether it's Miss or Mrs. or Mr. but asking, and this is also something that came up in the survey, that there's a fairly optimistic rating of the effectiveness and impact of social and ethics committees. But this person wants to know, what are the achievements of the social and ethics committee, especially in those companies where the committee are effective? In other words, if I can rephrase, what difference have you seen serving on quite a number of social and ethics committees? What difference did the introduction and the function of the social and ethics committee make in those companies where it really works?
I think that, it is a fair question. And if you think that social and ethics committees haven't been around that long, right? I think one of the first things, is the focus around board diversity, right? It has really come to the fore. I've been, I'll give away my age. I'm almost 60. I've been sitting on boards for 25, 30 years. And in the last 5 years or so, is when this conversation around board diversity and the mix has really come to be talked about a lot, right? So that's one sort of specific area that I think that the Social and Ethics Committee has made a difference. I think also when we start to talk about stakeholder engagement, right? A lot of companies knew they had unions, they knew they had staff, they knew they were working in communities, but it's only in the very recent past that it has become an issue. And also the use and the direction that we have had around the spend on social, what we call them, corporate social investment or responsibility budgets, right? Previously, it was just about give a check and hope, and pray that something is done well with that. Now we're finding much more focused use of that spend to make better for more people or the organization, right, etc. And also, if you look at it, in the old days, and Deon and I maybe are the people who will remember the old days where you got a bursary and then you came back and you worked for the company for 2-3 years and then you moved on. Now there's more clawback, and talking about clawback, there's far more responsibility in terms of where do those shares vest and where do they go to, and what is the responsibility of the individuals, in terms of the company. I mean, all these corporate actions that we're seeing, right? I do believe it's because there's a heightened awareness of the ethics behind this. And I believe that the Social and Ethics Committee has started to ask those questions, You start to look at things like, I could go on, social media, how we interact with the media, right? But when, previously, you know, the investment world media was like, "Ooh, we don't deal with those guys. You know, we don't want to be with those guys. You know, that they'll affect our share price, right?" But then we realized that, you know, some of the stuff that we put on social media could affect, you know, our share price, and you know, and that's like something that we never even thought about. You know, it becomes a fis manure suddenly, you know, and we don't have the competence to deal with it. So maybe we need to have more people who've got communications and digital experience so that we understand how this footprint works and how it goes. So I think that it's I don't want to say it's entirely social and ethics contribution, but it's the awareness around those things and having them on the boardroom table and having individuals who are passionate enough to stand up and be counted on those issues, right, on the boardroom table, that have created the higher alertness, awareness, and sensitivity.
Yeah, and I think there's different, very definitely in companies where the social and ethics committee are effective, a different conversation now in the boardroom, and we also see different conversation at the AGM. And I think one of the most promising elements that I see is that where initially, if you look at the original statutory mandate of the Social and Ethics Committee, was very much a compliance mandate. Do we adhere to relevant legislation and so on? And what I really sense is a shift to impact. In other words, not can we tick the box that we comply with safety and health regulation or consumer protection, but how well are we performing? And I find that an incredibly exciting perspective. And I hope that something of that will creep into the amendments to the company's regulations as well. We still need to watch that space. But Fatima, a last question to you personally, just Professor Howard asked the question that obviously the Social and Ethics Committee is a board subcommittee. But would it make sense to also have a social and ethics committee on the management side? In other words, a more operational social and ethics committee that mirrors the social and ethics committee at the board level, and then that obviously, if I understand him correctly, that operational social and ethics committee could become the channel through which you report back to your board social and ethics committee. What do you think of that?
I think it's a great idea, and we are seeing it a lot in the municipal environment in particular, and in some corporate organizations. So the language that is tending to be used, just not to get the committee language mixed up, is an ethics or an operational working group. And the sense is that ethics is everybody's business. So there seems to be a tendency where the custodian of ethics, call that person, the senior person called the ethics champion, would chair a committee where they would get the heads of the different operational divisions within the organization, like HR, compliance, governance, etc., sit around the table and say, let's talk about coordination and integration of ethics, because ethics is everyone's business. So if you don't do pre-employment screening and vetting as HR, it exposes us to risk. So we have that conversation for integration, and that becomes the funnel that when I report as the ethics champion up to the social and ethics committee, I have that holistic perspective, but I'm also managing ethics within the organization. And it's working very successfully in what we've been seeing in terms of the impact. And then also, Deon, the question you were asking earlier about assessing culture change, is it's adding to the conversation about us starting to look at performance indicators rather than compliance indicators, which adds to the nature of the conversation that that's starting to happen in social and ethics committees.
Okay, we are almost out of time, so I'm going to give a last short opportunity to both of you, and that relates exactly to this one aspect that came up when we looked at what are the major drawbacks. And in the survey, it was identified that the second biggest drawback is that social and ethics committees still have too much of a compliance focus and not really a focus on the governance of effective social and ethics performance. A word of wisdom from both of you. Fatima, starting with you, and then I'm going to give the last word to the Tombi. What can be done in order to make or to get this shift away from just mere tick box compliance to really ensuring that our corporations are ethical organizations and responsible corporate citizens.
Deon, I think for me, the key things are elevating the status of our social and ethics committees so that we make them more relevant. But I also think one of the important things, and I'm latching on to Principle 16 of King, which is also inundated on in the practice note, is about us adopting a stakeholder inclusive approach. And I think as organizations, if we start to become more a stakeholder inclusive in assessing our ethics, risks and opportunities, we start to open that conversation and are able to maximize the impact that we make as social and ethics committees. Thank you for the opportunity today, Deon.
Yeah, thanks. That makes a lot of sense. Ntombi, final word to you.
Okay, a final 2 words. First of all, I just want to go back to that conversation around the link, all right, with funding, right? Today RMB offers a green fund, right? And that's a good thing, because once the money starts to talk, we start to change the behavior of corporates. So let's just leave that thought there as one of the things that is happening and outcomes of what has happened to the social and ethics thing. So what do we need? I think we need to create greater line of sight in terms of the strategy, right? And that link, and that was mentioned by someone else earlier on, right? But I think we need passion, right? And we need to find that passion. And that passion we will find amongst the younger people, the youth who are currently unemployed, who are very, very, very passionate about changing our world and preserving our world. And so we need to appoint them to our boards.
Okay, and I think that's an excellent note to end on. Thank you for all the conversation going on in the chat. Many people commented that it was a really insightful session, and that was the whole purpose of the session. So thank you to my 2 panelists for preparing yourselves and for really great insights that you shared, which are clearly appreciated. Thank you, Paul, for the work that you and your team has done, and also to our colleagues at the IoD. Julie, with that, it's back to you to wrap up proceedings.
Deon, I would just like to, I'm not sure if you can see that last slide, if I've shared it correctly. I would just like to thank everyone for participating today and for staying on the line right up until the end. This event, I'd like to thank our speakers. It's been a great event. And we would really like to hear from you on your thoughts on this event. If you scan the QR code, a survey will come up with a survey for you to come give us your thoughts. It's a very short, literally less than 2-minute survey. And I'd also like to ask you to diarize our next webinar event, which is the Dissenting Director. It will be hosted by our Board Governance Forum, taking place on the 1st of December. It would be great if we could also have all our audience members attend that. Thanks very much, and have a good day further. Thanks, everyone.